Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Education USA webinar on applying to graduate school in the United States. I'm Jenica Heim, and I'm your Education USA advisor to Canada. As always, on our monthly webinar series, we will be focusing on Canadian students applying to US universities. However, if you're not from Canada, a lot of this information is general and will apply to the majority of international students. Education USA is a U.S. State Department funded resource. We offer free advising for students interested in studying in the United States. So for either guidance counselors or students or parents, please reach out to me with any additional questions that you have. I love assisting you with getting into school in the United States. So for today's presentation, we brought in an expert. Elsa Evans is the Senior Associate Director of Graduate Admissions at the University of San Francisco. She also attended University of British Columbia. So she has a Canadian undergraduate education and works in graduate admissions. So she has a really unique stance on being able to assist Canadians with the admissions process in the United States. So without further ado, I'd like to invite Elsa to jump on microphone and begin the presentation.
I'm glad to be here today. Thank you so much to Education USA for having me. I am really grateful for the opportunity to speak with you all about this process. Hopefully, some of you have already considered graduate school. I'm sorry, I'm just having a technical problem. I'm not able to change my slides. Jenica, if you're there, could you assist? Oh, there we go. Okay. Whew, thank you. And I see the chat has come up, it looks like. So I'm going to go ahead and send this link for the closed caption if anybody, well, I think I'm going to. Well, perhaps I can't. It still doesn't look like it's working. All right, so as Jenica mentioned, I graduated from the University of British Columbia back in 2005, and now I currently work in arts and sciences graduate admissions here at USF. So I have a bit of an understanding of why people come to the U.S. to go to graduate school. We do have a lot of international students that we work with, so some of the questions that I get I will be addressing today. So why might you consider coming to graduate school in the United States? We do have a huge variety of universities that students can attend, and that means more diversity of programs and research opportunities. As you can see, we have about 4,000 universities in the United States that award bachelor's degrees, and of those, approximately 1,300 offer master's and or doctoral programs. And that's compared to about 100 in Canada. So it just gives you an idea of the scope of how much more opportunity there is in the United States if you have kind of a niche interest or subject that you're looking for. We do have quite a few Canadians that do come to the United States for graduate school every year. As you can see, there were about 10,000 in 2014 that specifically came to do graduate degree programs. But one of the questions that we hear often is, why would I pay more to come to the U.S. to do a degree that I could do in Canada? And I completely sympathize with that. I wouldn't suggest spending more to get a similar or an equivalent degree. So if there is a really strong program in Canada that you're able to attend, of course that would make sense. But perhaps there are some other reasons you might choose to come to the United States. And the biggest of those for graduate programs is usually academics or a research expertise area that's just not available in Canada. There are a couple other reasons that we hear from graduate students of why they come. Some come for athletics. They get a fifth year of eligibility, and so they continue in graduate school to play on a college team. There's also brand recognition, reputation. The Ivy League is attractive internationally. But there's other, what they call like the junior Ivy, which is Stanford and some of the other private universities. But here in California, we also have a really fantastic public school system, the UC system. So there are a lot of international students that travel to come to these really great state schools, but also the prestigious private schools. Perhaps you could get a good funding offer for your graduate program. If you're in a research-based program or a doctoral program, you may find that you could get equivalent funding here in the U.S. Or maybe you've got family ties, either your parents went to graduate school or school in the United States, you want to go to their alma mater, or perhaps you have family living here in the U.S. and you just like to come down and spend a few years. So there are some things that you'll want to think about as you start to do your research about which kind of graduate programs, what types of schools you want to apply to. And when you're doing the research, it can be overwhelming because there are so many different options. So I just wanted to give you a few things to think about during that process to help you narrow down perhaps the schools a little bit. The first and probably the most important piece is the accreditation of the university. Most universities in the United States that offer a master's degree are going to be regionally accredited. And depending on the type of program, if it's maybe an accounting program, they may also have a professional accreditation that goes along with that. But the most important is to be regionally accredited by an organization that's recognized by the Secretary of Education. And you can easily find that information if you just do a quick search online of the name of the school plus accreditation, and it usually pulls out the results right away. The other thing, as I mentioned, to consider is whether or not you want to do a professional program. So maybe you're interested in getting a lot of hands-on practice during your graduate work, and then you'll work in the industry afterwards, or an academic program. This would be a research-based master's or doctoral program. Possibly you don't have enough research or publication experience from your undergrad, and so you want to do a master's as a stepping stool into a graduate program, and that's an option as well. So kind of keep in mind whether you're thinking you want to work in academia afterwards, or perhaps you want to go straight into the workforce. In that case, more often than not, people would do a master's degree. Another thing to consider is whether or not your field, discipline, profession is available, and what specifically, if there's an area of interest that you have. So, it's good to consider if you want to go into finance, well, you don't just have to get a finance degree. You could do an economics degree, you could do an MBA. It depends on the type of work that you want to do, and also, what your long-term career goals are. If you want to go into more of a managerial role, an MBA might benefit you in the long run. Some other things to consider: location. Depending on your field, there might be a region of the U.S. that would make more sense. So if you're interested in coastline preservation, you probably want to stick close to the shore. If you're interested in finance, New York is an obvious choice. If you're interested in technology, come down here to San Francisco. We've got a lot of that. Some other, region-specific things: agriculture would be more common in Nebraska and our central states. So consider what kind of program you want to do, and find the area where that might be more available. Cost is a big deal. Is it a public school or a private school? As I mentioned before, the University of California system is very strong, but they charge students from out of state or out of country much more than they would charge students from California. So you might be surprised to learn that some public schools would cost more for an international student than a nearby private school that maybe charges everyone the same tuition regardless of where they're from. Another thing to consider is reputation. Depending on your field, the name of your school can have a long-term impact on your career. So if you're looking for a specific type of position, maybe you want to look and see where people that have that kind of position have gone to school and use that as a resource. So for example, on LinkedIn, you can go and you can look at the jobs that you're interested in, and kind of do a quick survey of where the people that have those jobs went to school, and that might help you influence where you decide to go for your master's or graduate work. So as you're narrowing down your focus, hopefully you'll get to the point where you have maybe 5 or 10 programs that you think you want to apply to. And the application process will help you narrow it down further, because there may be programs that you think you're qualified for or you think are the right fit for you, but as you do research into the application process, you find out that maybe it's not such a good fit after all. So first, we usually talk about giving yourself at least a year before you want to start the program to start doing your research. So you all are doing a great job of that right now. Hopefully you're looking at fall 2016 or beyond. And that'll give you plenty of time to prepare what you need for the application, to make a decision, to get all the facts about the programs that are out there, and gives you plenty of time to still get everything turned in by the deadline. Make sure you check the deadlines, and then you'll want to work backwards from there. So for example, if the deadline is February 1st and you know you need to do some test scores, you'll have to give yourself a timeline of when each step needs to happen. About 8 to 10 months before the program would start, you'd want to be thinking about submitting your application. We currently have our application open now for the next fall, so usually it's available at least 12 to 10 months in advance of the start date of the program. And the deadlines are between usually 8 and 6 months before the start of the program, depending on the type of program. So then you'll want to submit all of your documents on time. That's a big one. If you know what the deadline is and you've worked backwards, hopefully you should be able to get everything in before the deadline, even if you can. For us, most of our programs start admitting in January, so there's not a real huge advantage to applying now versus in December, but it doesn't hurt to be early if you have everything prepared. And then about 6 months before the program start date usually is when you're receiving your admission decision, assuming you've applied on time. And that, can be a great opportunity to look at other sides of the school other than the academics. So if you've been admitted to more than one school in the U.S., there may be some other things that you want to consider, like how much funding they're awarding you. If they haven't given you full funding, maybe you're in a master's program that doesn't offer full funding, what's going to be the cost of tuition per unit? And then how many units will you take overall? Maybe it's 35 units in 1 year versus 40 units over 2 years. So it sounds more expensive up front, but in reality it will be less. And also the cost of living should be factored into that. So you'll want to look at, is it a 1-year program, a 2-year program, a 3-year program? If it's a PhD program, is it going to take 5 years? And factor all of that in. Of course, there are other expenses as well, as, depending on where you're from. Maybe you're on the East Coast in Canada and you're coming to the West Coast in the US, getting back and forth between home may become an issue, especially if you're doing a PhD program and you'll be doing it for a number of years. So that could factor into cost as well. So there's a number of things to think about as you're once hopefully you've been offered admission to a few schools. And then, I'd like to go into the specific details about the application and what you're submitting and kind of some best practices on the documents that you'll be submitting. But before that, I always like to remind students that whenever you're contacting the admissions office or faculty, you're making an impression. And that could be the person that's reviewing your application, so professionalism will go a long way. For questions about the process, maybe the application, if you're having trouble with part of the application or you want to know the status of your decision or your application, you're more than welcome to contact admissions. We're happy to answer the phone. We also get back to folks on email usually fairly quickly. But my one piece of advice is try not to do both, at least in a very short amount of time. So if you've emailed us today, we don't get back to you by tomorrow, maybe give us another day before you call if it's not urgent. If it's urgent to begin with, I would always recommend calling. You're more likely to get a quick answer over the phone for an admissions office because in general we are staffed during business hours. But if you're calling and emailing us on the same day, maybe you would get 2 different people, one that answers the phone and one that's answering emails, and then they both respond and you've taken extra time. So my word of advice is if you're going to email us, have it be something that's perhaps not so urgent. If you have an urgent issue, give us a call. And I think that's pretty true across admissions offices. Certainly some are better staffed than others, so phone it might be hard to get through at first, but leave a voicemail if there's an opportunity to do that. And most schools are pretty good about getting back to voicemails. Of course, if you haven't heard back from somebody by phone or by email in a few days, it's okay to try again. And then on the other side, if you're contacting a professor, perhaps you're applying to a PhD or a master's program that's research-based and you'll need an advisor that you have to select in advance, you'll want to contact them ahead of time before you apply. And with the case of professors, I definitely recommend email. As you know, they're teaching, maybe they have office hours, but there are students in their office during office hours. So giving them a chance to respond to an email will most likely be a little bit quicker for you. So keep that in mind as you go through the application process. One of the biggest pieces of your application is going to be your transcripts. I have a lot of detail about this in a couple of slides, but just to give you a quick overview, For most programs, they will be heavily considered. Either they'll look at your overall performance, or maybe there's specific coursework that they're interested in. If you're doing an economics program, they're going to want to see some economics background. If you're doing computer science, they're going to want to see computer science. If you're going to med school, they're going to want to see a biology or science-based background usually. If you've already graduated, make sure your transcripts show that. If you're in progress, if you're still in the program, show what classes you're registered in on your transcripts. And then some schools in the United States require you to get an outside evaluation. And that just helps them interpret your grades and if your degree is equivalent to a US degree. For the most part, students from Canada, the education systems are quite similar. The number of courses that you take is very similar. So for the most part, they are considered equal. So it's not usually such a concern. If the school requires an evaluation, you may ask if they would, consider waiving it for a Canadian school. They may say no, but at least you've asked. And then the biggest piece, and this was always the challenge for me as an undergrad, is comparing it to the US grading scale. We have a very different grading scale here than some universities in Canada. So you don't want your transcripts to be viewed unfavorably because the reviewer doesn't understand the grading scale. And I'll go into detail a little bit more about that. Some other items that you'll have to include, statement of purpose, statement of intent, personal essay, personal statement. They're called all different things. But basically, my best advice on those is to read the instructions carefully and follow them. So if there's a prompt that you have to answer, or maybe they want you to address specific questions, perhaps they want to hear about your background. Perhaps they don't want to hear about your background. They only want to know what your goals are going forward. Make sure you understand what they're asking. And if it's vague, then you can always ask for more guidance from the admissions office. You don't have to flatter anyone. It's not necessary to name every faculty in the department, but if you are interested in working with an advisor, in that case, then I would usually recommend mentioning, hey, I'm interested in working with this professor. My research interests align because X, Y, and Z. Some programs may want you to address red flags. Some don't. So make sure you read carefully what their instructions say. And that could be anything from a low grade in a required course, or maybe you had to take a semester off to care for a family member, something like that. And it's okay to say it in broad terms. You don't have to go into detail about what the situation was. Just say, I ended up taking a semester off to care for my family member. And then typically they'll want to hear about your goals. What's your career goal? What are your academic goals? What kind of projects do you want to work on? What's your research interest? That's usually kind of the meat of the statement of purpose. So keep those things in mind, but above all else, read the instructions and follow their prompts. And next, letters of recommendation. This is going to be important depending on the type of program that you're applying to, whether or not they come from an academic source or a professional source. So an academic program, maybe you're doing a research degree or you're doing a PhD program and you're currently in school, or maybe you've been out of school for a few years, they're going to probably want to see at least one, if not two, academic references. Versus an MBA program or a business program or any kind of professional-oriented graduate program, they're more likely going to want to see professional-based experience. They may want one of each. It just depends on the type of program. They'll usually outline that on their website. Find out if you need to submit them a hard copy, a paper copy in a sealed envelope, or if you can have them submitted online. Most of the universities that I've talked to, they do online letters of recommendation. So you'll enter the names of your recommenders, they get an email, and they can upload it directly. And that saves you the hassle of trying to get it from them and then getting it to the school. It also ensures that if you haven't waived the right to view it, if you have waived the right to view it, that it's kept secure through that process. Give yourself plenty of time and give your recommenders plenty of time to submit their letters. That's one of the biggest holdups that we see from applicants, is that their recommendations don't come in. So if you know that you're applying to a program, as early as you can, once you start the application, give your recommenders an opportunity to submit their letters. And then it's okay to follow up with them, a few weeks before the deadline and a few days before the deadline if they still have not submitted. Another thing you could do is, if however many letters are required, maybe it's 2, submit 3 recommenders. And that way, if one of them falls through, you have 2 still to fall back on. I wouldn't necessarily recommend overdoing it with the recommenders. We require 2, so if you submitted 5, that might be a bit much. So, remember that the people reviewing your applications read every document, and that's going to take up a lot of time if they're reviewing, double the number of recommendation letters. Test scores. So, again, depending on the type of program that you're applying to, you may need to submit some standardized test scores. For Canadians, for the most part, the English language test scores are not required. Most schools will waive them automatically. If they don't, for some reason, I would recommend to request a waiver, because for the most part, even if you grew up speaking French, you probably also have some English. If you're here, I'm sure that's the case, and it doesn't hurt to ask for a waiver. But for the majority of universities, you're not going to have to take it. You may have to take a generalized graduate admission test. So that would be like the GRE or the GMAT. The GRE tends to be more for science, humanities, social science programs. It has 3 sections. There's a verbal section, a quantitative section. Those are multiple choice. And then there's an analytical writing section where you answer some prompts. If you're applying into a program that requires an additional subject test in your subject, you may need to take that as well. Be warned that they only offer them a few times a year, and they do book up in advance. So keep an eye on the timing for that. The GMAT is typically required for business programs. Excuse me. So that's an option as well. And then if you're applying to a specialized program, the Mcat for medical school, the DAT for dental school, LSAT for law school, etc. Again, with all of these, you want to give yourself plenty of time to book the test in advance. So if you know the deadline is, February 1st, and it takes at least 2 weeks for the test score results to come in, the last possible date you would want to take it would be January 15th, and even that's cutting it a little close. I would suggest, earlier the better. Most of these scores last for 2 years. And then also, give yourself plenty of time to study. They are a standardized test, and depending on your ability to study for that type of test, you may need more or less time. You may want to take a preparation class to help you get set for that, because it can be a big part of your application process. Sorry about that. Don't know what happened. Let's try one more time. There we go. Okay, so I mentioned transcripts before, and I wanted to give a lot of special attention to transcripts because as a Canadian applicant, this is kind of one of the biggest changes or challenges that you might face, because your education system is so similar, but because the grading scale tends to be quite different, it can cause some confusion with reviewers. So the first thing I would say is determine if you can submit unofficial transcripts for admission review. Some schools, since they're doing online applications, just have you upload a copy. It could be maybe they require a copy of your paper transcripts. Maybe they would let you upload a web version that you've downloaded from a student portal if you're a current student, or perhaps an alumni that has a copy of your transcripts. That's fine. Or they may require that you submit paper copies. So be prepared. I suggest ordering several copies of your transcripts in advance. And that way, as you need to send them to schools, you can. Just make sure to leave them sealed in the envelope with the signature on the back. You don't want to open up those official transcripts. Accreditation is required usually by universities when admitting students. Most Canadian universities, that's not an issue. If you're concerned, as I mentioned before, you can just do a quick search. Also, I mentioned evaluation by a third party. So NACIS organizations, that's what they do. They evaluate degrees for equivalency to US degrees. So if your school that you're applying to requires it, you go onto the NACIS website, you find a member organization, and you send in your transcripts to them for evaluation. That may take some time as well, so make sure you give yourself plenty of time. Some schools do it in-house, so then you just start giving them directly a copy of your transcript. And as I mentioned, it doesn't hurt to ask if it can be waived for Canada because the education is so similar. And so if you don't end up sending it for evaluation, my recommendation is, if you can, include a conversion chart with your transcripts so that reviewers can understand the grading scale. So You can upload it behind the transcripts and with just a brief note that explains where you got it. That's going to be important. So maybe you got it from the university's website, maybe you got it from a third-party source. Give them an opportunity to go directly to the source to see where you got that information. And then finally, on your transcripts, I mentioned this before, if you have graduated and your transcript don't show the date and the degree awarded, make sure you have some other proof of graduation. This could be a diploma, a letter from the registrar, anything like that. If you're still enrolled in classes, it's fine to apply, but you want to show that you're registered and what classes you're registered for so they can see your progress. And if you're applying now for a graduate program for next fall, and your grades come out in January from the winter or fall session, it doesn't hurt to send them to the admissions office for them to upload to your application. So this is what I was talking about with the standardization of grades. It was kind of a big shock to me, coming from high school in the US where the standard grading scale was an A is 90 to 100, a B is 80 to 89, a C is 70 to 79, a D is 60 to 69. And I think the first time I ever got a 69, I was completely shocked, but that ended up not being the end of the world for me in my bachelor's degree. But it was a big change because that was actually a C plus instead of a D plus. So that's something that depending on which university you're at, your grading scale may not fall in those ranks. So if an A at your university is between 80 and 100, you want to make sure that reviewers know that because they might be looking at your upper 70s average and thinking you're a C student when in fact at your university that's a B student. But importantly, in the US we use GPA where your letter grades are equal to a certain number of points out of 4.0. So you can see A or A plus is a 4.0 and then it goes down from there. In general, universities are probably going to want to see a 3.0 average, which is a B average, a mid-B average. So for me at UBC, that would have been a mid-70s average, which here in the US, if you had a 70 average, you would probably have a 2.0. So, that's something to make sure that your school's conversion chart is available. And you can see the links below. McMaster has a nice conversion chart for some of the larger schools. And if that doesn't work, you can check the GPA calculator from foreigncredits.com. Another thing as a Canadian, you'll want to make sure that you have proof of funding. Because you don't have to get a visa to come to the United States, you only need the I-20. You don't have to do a visa interview, which is nice. You'll just show your I-20 if you're admitted. You get an I-20 form, and you'll show it with your proof of funds as you cross into the United States. But the proof of funds are still going to be required like any international student. So what you'll want to find out from the schools that you're applying to is when that's required, how much you'll need to show, and what types of accounts they're accepting. Typically, it can either be due at the time of application or at the time of admission. More likely, a research-based school, a PhD program would be requesting it at the time of admission because they are more likely to offer significant funding. A practical professional program is more likely to require it up front at the time of application. How much you'll need is going to be for the first year of your graduate program. So that's going to include all the tuition fees, cost of living for 1 year, and the other expenses, which typically includes health insurance, transportation, entertainment, personal care, things like that. So the university will estimate that amount for you. They'll give you the information of how much they need and what types of accounts they will accept. And usually it has to be a cash account. So checking, savings, some kind of money market, anything that is readily available in cash and isn't based on the stock market or tied up in a fund that you can't access until after the program starts. And then, as I mentioned, once you're admitted and you've shown your proof of funds, the university that you're admitted into will send you an I-20 form that you'll bring with you as you come to the United States. My final tips are plan ahead. Do some research, connect with people, find out what you need to know about the program, about the university, about the types of programs available, and try to narrow it down to a few options. You don't want to only apply to one school, but I also, don't recommend applying to 20 graduate programs because then you're going to end up hopefully with a few options of admission and it's better to prepare in advance and decide where you're going to apply in a more narrow stream. As I mentioned, reading application instructions carefully, making sure that you're following the instructions for the right application. If you're applying for more than one school, we've had students that have followed a prompt from another university, which is usually fine, but just make sure your statement of purpose doesn't refer to another university. That can be trouble. And like I said, if it's appropriate, you can contact the professors. In some cases, it might be required. So, if look into that, depending on the type of program you're applying to, and reach out to them. It doesn't hurt. Most of the time, they're happy to talk to current students as long as you have legitimate questions or interest in their research, and you're not just doing it for the sake of doing it. As I mentioned as well, please submit all your documents before the deadline, if at all possible. If you find a perfect program and the deadline was last week, it doesn't hurt to contact the admissions office and request that they see if they'll allow you to submit late. It will depend on the type of program and how many applications they have, but they may allow you to submit a few days late, a few weeks late, so it doesn't hurt to ask. Also, remember to give your recommenders plenty of time to submit. They're often very busy themselves, and so it doesn't hurt to remind them as the deadlines are approaching. And also, I can't emphasize it enough, don't assume that reviewers know the Canadian grading scales. Give them the information up front that they need. If you can translate your GPA or your percentage into a US GPA, that can help. And always remember to ask your admissions staff for help. We're here to answer questions about the process. We want you to apply to graduate programs that will be the best fit for you. So it's okay to ask us questions. If you're asking questions about where the alumni are working, what kind of internships people get, what kind of research grants people are getting, those are all questions that we're more than happy to answer. And if we can't answer, we'll send it to the department and maybe they can give you some feedback. But it never hurts to reach out and ask for information. And hopefully, if you're contacting us right around the deadline, give us a couple of extra days. You'd be amazed how busy our inboxes get right before application deadlines. Another thing to consider is as you are accepting offers of admission, maybe you've been admitted to your second choice school and they've asked you to deposit maybe $500 to hold your spot. But your first choice school hasn't given you a decision yet. You can always ask for an extension on that deadline. It's possible they may not grant it, but if they do, that will give you a little more leeway to wait and see what the decision is from the other school that you're applying to. It does happen. We have had students that have deposited with us and have withdrawn to attend another school or for other family or work-related reasons. And it's always helpful for us in the admissions office to know why you're not coming. I know sometimes people feel guilty for switching schools, but it's really fine. It's quite common. So it actually is more helpful to us to know the actual reason than a vague answer, like personal reasons. So I do recommend that you give us the information if you can about where you're going and maybe why you chose that school. If you didn't get enough funding offered from our school, maybe we can counteroffer. So it doesn't hurt to give honest feedback. And some final tips, depending on where you are in the process of researching graduate programs, maybe you're right at the beginning. So my best advice for people that are just starting to search is, rely on the resources around you. Word of mouth is going to be invaluable. So friends that are in the field, or maybe friends that are in a similar bachelor's degree program, or maybe you're in a master's degree program looking for PhD programs, your family, professors, if you're still in school or if you still have connections with your professors, or career services at your university. They can be a good resource for you to get some ideas of where to start. And also, as I mentioned, go on LinkedIn. Look at the kinds of jobs that you want. Look at the companies that you want to work for and see where the people that work there went to school. If you're interested in academia, a lot of professors are now moving on to LinkedIn as well. So you can kind of get an idea of where the pipelines are for different industries by reverse researching them. And then, of course, contacting the admissions office or the program office, contacting faculty. We're going to be your best insight into whether or not the program is a good fit for you. And we want you to be in a program that works for you. We want you to succeed and pursue the profession that you're studying afterwards. So definitely reach out to us and ask for help. And if you're just getting started, Education USA is a great resource. Their website has a lot of great tools. As Jenica mentioned, you can meet with her, you can email with her. So use the advisors there. They're going to have a lot of information about different schools and options for you that maybe the other word of mouth folks might not. So that is my webinar, my information, and I'm sorry that the chat hasn't started working. I hope if you have any questions that you would be willing to email them. I'm more than happy to email responses as well, if it's something you need help with. Thank you very much, and thank you all for taking the time to be here today.
Thank you so much, Elsa. We really appreciate the information. The chat did not come back to life, unfortunately. I was in communication. It's a system-wide issue that we're lucky to have experienced during our time during this webinar. So what there is available is a hand-raising function. And so I would invite any of the participants to click the hand-raising function if you have a question. It's on the chat bar. It looks like a little person going like this. And if you click that, I can give you, I can let you use your microphone. You can connect your microphone and ask a question that way. So that's my one thing that we can do if you'd like. I'll give everybody about 5 seconds if they want to raise their hand and try to connect a microphone. Okay, we have no takers, so it's okay. Please email after the presentation any questions that you have. My email is at the bottom of the slide here. It's ottawa@educationusa.info. Any question that is that Elsa can answer, we'll loop her in, and she can definitely help at the end to answer your questions. So as we sign off here, I'd like to give you some reminders. First of all, if you are in either Calgary, Toronto, Montreal, or Ottawa, the QS grad school tour is happening right now. Vancouver happened yesterday, but the other 4 cities are to come. So please, if you're in those cities, go to the tour and mention Education USA to get in for free. This is a great way for you to meet admissions officers in person and make a big first impression. Something that you should know is that typically, so folks like Elsa who read your admissions application, if they're recruiting in Canada, she would be the one to go, and also she would be the one to read your application. So you're actually speaking to the person who is responsible for the application. A lot of times, not always. So it's a great way to make a first impression with those folks. Please also follow us on social media. Education USA is all over the place, and we have great daily tips and updates for you, especially Canadian-centric updates. And of course, we have a webinar series monthly. Next month, we're going to be discussing specifically MBA programs. So if that is what you are interested in, please join us in October, the second Wednesday at 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern. Thank you for your time today, again, Elsa, and for all of you who are able to make it. I hope you have a fantastic Wednesday.